Welcome to the Karma Verdict. Let us get started with today's story. My fiancée waited until the final deposit on our wedding venue had cleared before she told me she was moving in with her ex. She didn't ask me. She announced it. The way you'd announce the weather. Marcus needs me right now and I'm going to be there for him, she said. And she kept folding her napkin while she said it, like the sentence had cost her nothing at all. The worst part isn't that she said it. The worst part is that she sat there waiting for me to nod. And the part I still can't get out of my head, even now, is that 11 weeks later, I found out the entire story she'd told me about him. The story I'd built 3 years of my life on top of had the names in the wrong places. My name is Daniel. I'm 34. I design load-bearing structures for a firm downtown. And for 3 years, I was engaged to a woman named Nora, who could make a whole room lean toward her without ever raising her voice. She ran events for an art gallery. She wore color. People remembered her name after one handshake. I was the one who remembered the parking validation, and her mother's birthday, and the name of her boss's wife. That was our arrangement, and I never once resented it, because when it worked, it worked. She used to call me her floor. Everything else in my life is weather, she'd say. You're the floor. I thought that was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to me. It took me 3 years to hear it properly. A floor is the thing you walk on. Nora came to me broken. Or that's how it was presented. We met at a friend's housewarming 8 weeks after she'd ended things with Marcus, a musician who had spent a decade standing 1 inch away from a record deal that never came. She told me he'd disappear for weeks at a time. She told me he'd resurface only when he needed something, that he'd emptied her energy the way you empty a glass, that she'd been the one holding him together until there was nothing left of her to hold anything. I sat on a stranger's balcony and listened to her cry about it until 2 in the morning. I remember thinking, whoever did this to her is going to have to get through me next time. That's the sentence I want you to remember. Whoever did this to her, we moved fast, because she wanted to move fast. My lease became our lease. My savings became the thing that covered her 3 months between gallery contracts. When her car died, I bought the replacement outright and put her name on it, because putting her name on things felt like proof of something. She'd curl into my side on the couch and say, "I've never had this. I've never had someone who just handles it." And he handled it. I turned down a project lead position in another city because she said she couldn't do long distance again, not after last time. I want to be very clear about something. I wasn't a victim being tricked. I was a grown man choosing, over and over, to be the safe place. I'd do most of it again, just not for her. The first crack showed up about 9 months before the wedding, and it showed up as a phone lying face down. Nora had never done that. Her phone lived screen up on every surface in our apartment. And then 1 week it didn't. It was just work, she said. It's the gallery group chat. They're insane. Then it was a laugh at something I couldn't see. Then it was her going quiet for a second too long when a certain song came on in a restaurant. I didn't accuse her of anything, because I'd been raised to believe that suspicion is a kind of insult you can't take back. So instead, I got quietly worse at sleeping. Then came the comparisons, and those were the ones that actually did damage, because they never sounded like attacks. We'd be driving home from dinner with friends, and she'd say, "Isn't it funny how you always know exactly what you're going to order?" Or, at a gallery opening, she'd introduce me as her fiancé, the engineer, and then add, "He's the reason I have a retirement account." And everyone would laugh, and I'd laugh, and something in my chest would go a half-degree colder. Safe, steady, reliable. Words that mean love right up until the day they're used as the reason you're not enough. And then, about 4 months out from the wedding, Marcus started existing again. Not as a person, as a weather system. She'd mentioned that a friend had run into him, that he looked thin, that his band had folded, that his landlord was being ruthless. Every mention arrived prepackaged with sympathy, and every one of them ended with a small glance at me to see how I was taking it. I took it well. I was proud of how well I took it. I actually said the words, "I'm not going to be the guy who's threatened by an ex. I want to reach back through time and shake myself by the collar." Then, 6 weeks before she said it out loud, she tried to put him on the guest list. We were at the kitchen table with the seating chart spread out between us, and she slid a card across the wood so lightly it barely landed. Marcus. Just the name. Just as a maybe, she said. I laughed because I assumed it was a joke, and when I looked up, she wasn't laughing. She said, "It would mean a lot to me for him to see that I'm okay." She said, "It's been 3 years. At some point, holding a grudge becomes a personality." I said no. That's the only time in 3 years I remember saying a flat no to her about anything. And I remember how strange the word felt in my mouth, like a tool I'd never picked up before. She didn't fight me on it. That's the part I should have noticed. She just gathered the cards into a neat stack, said fine, and went to bed. And the next morning she was cheerful in a way that had a floor under it. I thought I'd won something. What actually happened is that she stopped asking me for permission and started making arrangements. If I could put one sentence on a wall for every person watching this, it would be that one. When someone who always argues suddenly stops arguing, they haven't agreed with you. They've stopped including you. Here's the thing about the wedding. I paid for it, not out of some old-fashioned idea about who pays, but because Nora's contracts were seasonal and mine weren't. We opened a joint account 14 months out and I fed it every month. And by that spring, it held $22,000. The venue, a restored mill house an hour outside the city, took its deposits in 3 stages. I'd just wired the last one on a Thursday. I remember being happy about it in a stupid, uncomplicated way, the way you're happy when a long project finally locks into place. That was the night she told me. We were at our own kitchen table. She'd cooked, which should have been my first warning because Nora didn't cook. She assembled. She waited until I'd eaten. Then she put down her fork and said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not spiral." Marcus lost his place. His roommate went back to his family, and the lease collapsed, and he has nowhere. He needs me right now, and I'm going to be there for him. Not a question, not a request, a weather report. I said, "Define be there." She sighed like I was a slow student. It means I'm going to stay at his place for a few weeks while he sorts himself out, or he stays here. Either works. Honestly, either is fine with me. It's not a big deal, Daniel. We have history. You've always been so good about this stuff. I sat with that, good about this stuff, as though there were a filing cabinet in her head labeled things Daniel absorbs. I said, "We're getting married in 11 weeks. She said, "And we still are. This has nothing to do with us." That's what you're not getting. And then she leaned back and crossed her arms and gave me a look I had never once received in 3 years. It was pity. She was looking at me the way you look at someone who's about to embarrass himself. I said, "Nora, you've been texting him at midnight for 2 months and telling me it was the gallery." She didn't even flinch. She said, "Okay, so you were monitoring me. That's healthy." And there it was, the whole architecture of it, in one move. My question became my crime. I asked her one more time, calmly, and I'm glad I did, because her answer is the thing that ended it. I said, "If I asked you not to go, what would happen?" She smiled. A small, tired, superior little smile. She said, "Then I'd know you're smaller than I thought you were. Marcus gets a part of me that you don't have access to. You're the stability. He's the life. A person can need both. If you loved me, you'd be big enough to let me be a good person. You're the floor, Daniel. Floors don't get jealous." Something in me went very quiet. Not angry. Quiet. Like a fuse box tripping. I stood up, and I picked up my plate, and I rinsed it, and I set it in the rack. Then I said, "Go be there for him." She blinked. Her whole face reset. "What?" I said, "Go. Right now? If he needs you right now. Take the car." She said, "Don't be like this. We can talk about it tomorrow." I said, "There's nothing to talk about. You already decided. I'm just agreeing with you." And then I went into the bedroom and I pulled her weekend bag out of the closet and I set it on the bed. And I didn't say another word. And that silence did more damage than any shouting I could have managed. She left an hour later. She stood at the door with the bag on her shoulder waiting for me to stop her. And when I didn't, she said, "You're going to feel really stupid about this in a week." Then she was gone. I did not feel stupid in a week. I felt something much worse, which was clear. Here's what I did over the next 4 days. And none of it was revenge. It was just a man reading his own paperwork for the first time in 3 years. I read the venue contract, my name, my card, my liability. I read the vendor agreements, same. I called our bank on Monday morning and asked for a transaction history on the joint account, because I hadn't looked at it since February. Because why would I? The balance was $6,000 and change. $22,000 had gone in. 6 was left. There were 9 transfers out over 5 months, all under $3,000 each, all to the same external account. The name on that account was Marcus. I want to tell you I put the phone down calmly. I didn't. I sat on my own kitchen floor with my back against the dishwasher, and I made a sound I've never made before or since. Because here's what that meant. This wasn't a crisis that happened 8 days ago. She'd been funding him since winter, out of our wedding. And on the Thursday I wired the final venue deposit, she'd known there was already almost nothing left behind it. I didn't call her. I want you to understand how badly I wanted to, and how glad I am that I didn't. Instead, I printed every statement. I photographed the transfer records, and I sent all of it to my own email and to my brother's. Then I called the venue and asked what the cancellation window looked like. Then I waited, because I still didn't understand the shape of it, and I've built enough things to know you don't start cutting before you understand the load. The shape arrived on a Wednesday. In the parking garage under my office, a man was leaning against the wall near my car. Tall, wrecked jacket, tired in a way that had nothing to do with that particular day. He said, "You're Daniel." I said, "You're Marcus." He said, "Yeah. Can I have 10 minutes? And then this man, the man I had spent 3 years quietly hating from a safe distance, told me the truth in a concrete parking garage while the lights buzzed over our heads. He said, "First thing, I'm not homeless. I've got a lease. I've had the same apartment for 4 years." I said, "She told me your roommate left and the lease collapsed." He nodded slowly, like that confirmed something he'd been afraid of. He said, "Second thing, I never asked her for a single dollar. She started sending it in January. I sent the first 2 back. She kept sending it and telling me it was hers, from a bonus. And after a while, I stopped fighting her about it. And that's on me, and I'm going to give it back." But I didn't know where it was coming from until she told me last week that her fiancé had thrown her out. My mouth went dry. I said, "She told you I threw her out," he said. "She told me you'd been controlling her money for 2 years. She told me the engagement had already ended. She showed up at my door with a bag, Daniel." And then he said the thing that reorganized my entire life. He said, "Look, I need you to hear this from me and not from her. 3 years ago, I didn't ghost her. I was working 2 jobs and paying for her half of everything, and I thought I was going to marry her. She left in one afternoon. She told me she couldn't be with someone who had no ambition. And about a month later, I heard she was with a guy who had a real career and a real apartment. And he looked at me and let that sit. He said, 'That guy was you. I was the floor before you were.' I stood in that garage, and I felt 3 years rearrange themselves. Every story she'd told me about him on that balcony, every tear I'd caught, every time I'd said whoever did this to her is going to have to get through me. I'd been listening to a confession and hearing it as a wound. He wasn't the man who'd used her up. He was the previous version of me, describing the ending in advance, and I'd sat there nodding and buying the next round. Before he left, he did one more thing. He took out his phone, and he showed me a message she'd sent him in March. I'm not going to quote all of it. The line that mattered was this: "He's the floor. You're the reason I get out of bed. I'm not giving up either one." He said, "I've blocked her. I'm sorry it took me this long to come find you." And then he shook my hand and walked out into the daylight, and I never saw him again. 2 weeks later, Nora came home. Because of course she did. Marcus had cut contact, and she needed somewhere to be. And she still believed the floor was where she'd left it. She let herself in with her key and found the locks changed, and me standing in the hallway of the apartment with a folder in my hand. She started with warmth, then confusion, then the tears, which arrived exactly on schedule. She said, "I made a mistake. I was confused. He manipulated me. You were right about him. You were right about everything." Her mother, Carol, was standing behind her on the landing because she'd brought her mother, because she assumed there'd be an audience and that the audience would be on her side. So I let there be an audience. I handed Nora the folder. She opened it. 9 bank transfers, printed, highlighted. The wedding account balance. The venue contract with my name on every line. And on top, a printed copy of one message, dated in March, with one sentence circled. "He's the floor. You're the reason I get out of bed." I watched her face do something I'd never seen it do. It stopped performing. Carol took the page out of her daughter's hands and read it, and went a color I can only describe as gray. Nora said, "Daniel, please, we can fix this. I'll pay it back. Don't do this here." And when I didn't move, the mask came all the way off. She said, "So this is who you actually are. You've been sitting on this for weeks. You let me come home just so you could do this in front of my mother." I said, "No. You came home because you ran out of options, and I let you in because you deserve to hear it standing up." She said, "I made one mistake." I said, "You made 9 transfers." And she had nothing. That was the moment that told me everything. More than the folder did. More than the parking garage did. Watching her search for a next sentence and come back empty. Because in 3 years, I had never once seen Nora improvise. She always had the next sentence ready. That was the first time she didn't, and I said the only sentence I'd prepared. I said, the wedding is canceled. Everything is in my name, and the money leaves this family one way or the other. You can decide which way. Then I asked them both to leave my apartment. Here's how it landed. Carol paid me back $19,000 over 6 weeks, in full, without me ever having to file anything, because the alternative was a police report with her daughter's name on it, and Carol's entire life is her standing at church. The venue kept $4,000, and I let them keep it. Cheapest $4,000 I have ever spent in my life. The rest went into an account with exactly one name on it. Word travels the way it travels. Nora didn't lose her job dramatically. She just stopped being invited to things. 2 of our couple friends called me. 3 called her. By the autumn, she'd moved back into her mother's house, which for a woman who introduced herself by the neighborhood she lived in was its own kind of sentence. And I want to be honest, because a story like this is worthless if it's dishonest. I didn't feel triumphant. For about 2 months, I felt hollowed out and stupid, and I went to a therapist. And I said out loud the sentence I'd been avoiding, which was, I don't know how to be loved by someone who isn't in a crisis. That turned out to be the real work. The rest of it was just paperwork. 11 months later, my phone rang from a number I didn't have saved. I was standing in a hardware store on a Saturday morning with a woman named Priya, arguing about the color of a hallway in a place we'd just signed for together. Priya, who has never once needed rescuing and who fixes her own car, and who found out about all of this on our 4th date and said, "That's a lot. Are you okay now?" And then let it go. I answered the phone. Nora's voice, thinner than I remembered it. She didn't say hello. She said, "Daniel, I need you right now." And I stood there in the paint aisle and I felt absolutely nothing move in my chest. And I understood that this was what healed looks like. I said, "Go be there for yourself." I said it the way you'd announce the weather. Then I hung up. And I turned to Priya. And I said, "The darker one. Definitely the darker one. If you're sitting where I was sitting, listening to someone explain why their loyalty is a thing you have to be big enough to share, hear me. A person who calls you their floor is telling you exactly where they intend to stand. Believe them the first time. And when they announce it, don't argue. Just agree with them. And let them go. And change the locks before they come back looking for something solid to stand on. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to stay updated with our upcoming stories. Your support means the world to us.